We talk about data being money in that we use the term revenue leakage. And it's one of the things we point to is that if you're not billing accurately and not collecting accurately, you're losing money. So it's not just about the data. It's actually business performance and the ability to generate cash.
It's not just data, it's money.
Yeah, it's not just data, it's money. Welcome to the SaaS Builder Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wootton, and today we're going to discuss AI-powered financial governance. Joining me is Ahikam Kaufman, who is the founder and CEO at SafeBooks AI, which is a company that creates an auditable cross-system view of all transactions using AI and machine learning to automatically detect anomalies, fraud indicators, and inaccuracies. Their innovative approach eliminates the need for manual reconciliations and guesswork, establishing them as a credible leader in financial accuracy and security. And we're going to start today's conversation by answering the question, how is AI driving innovation in the office of the CFO? Ahikam Kaufman, welcome to the SaaS Builder Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward for a great conversation. Thank you so much.
You are right on the cutting edge. I mean, everybody's got to be talking about AI, and you're applying AI to really significant issues facing the office of the CFO, CFOs, and even CEOs. And so let's dig in a little bit. Can you help set the context for us and share your perspective on the current state of financial governance and the challenges that operators face?
Okay, so I think a way to think about it is, I think the way I look at the office of the CFO is you have like three foundational layers. You have the data layer, you have like an operational layer, and you have the reporting layer. Most staff members and, office of the CFO staff, they kind of work between the operational layer and the reporting layer. So they interact and process transactions on systems in the operational layer, like billing, like collection, like spend management, travel, payroll, and so on and so forth. And on the reporting layer, it's mostly around how do you consolidate the data, how do you report it. If you're a public company, you obviously need or a private company, you need to make accounting decisions. How do you audit it? How do you audit, how do you get audited for your reporting and all of that? But the foundation to all of that is the data layer. And some of the challenges in the office of the CFO exist because there's a talent gap between my ability as an accountant to deal with the integrity and accuracy of the data and the challenges in that layer. So we thought that building a platform like SafeBooks can help accountants and staff members at the office of the CFO to really validate and substantiate. And we can talk more about kind of what we do there, but in order to really validate and substantiate the data, so people that are mostly focused on the operational layer and the reporting layer can really get comfortable about the integrity and accuracy and completeness of the data across all the disparate systems, so they can, on top of that, continue to operate and also consolidate and report.
That's such an interesting angle in terms of the three layers, and it makes intuitive sense, right? You got to collect the data, you got to aggregate the data, and then you engage with the data. And especially in the accounting world, to your point, is you're moving transactions, recording transactions between systems, and then obviously where I engage with the data is mostly on the reporting level. But the assumption is the data is correct, and that you have a system of record. I mean, Maxio in many ways is a system of record for billing and invoicing, and it's happening so fast, all the billing in such an enormous amount of data, that there's no way for any individual to go through and check every transaction. And so what was the insight that led you to think about the data not being accurate? Was it something in your background, or had you worked at another company, or how did you identify this as a problem? Because I think there are a lot of people out there that have no idea that the data might not be accurate.
I think you're so right. My background is I worked in 4 big companies in the office of the CFO, at least partially. And my background, I started as a CFO. I started as CFO of a startup. And then I had the opportunity and the privilege to work for 4 public big companies. One of them was Mercury Interactive. Another one was Hewlett Packard, who acquired us. Another one was Stanley Black and Decker. And the last one being Intuit. And actually, I saw many times, especially at Intuit, where we build complex payment systems, that, at the office of the CFO, where all the volume starts to become really high volume transactional data, then people really use the old tools they used to have, which is like BI and spreadsheets, in order to really validate and substantiate the data, which is all about, can we make sure the data, typically a transaction would flow through different systems. If Maxio is working on the kind of the order to cash side, so you have billing systems like yourself, and then you have the ERP, and sometimes you have payment gateways, and you have CRM. And how do you make sure that all the data is consistent? Now, the reason you want to make sure the data is consistent, I'd like to think is for 3 reasons. First of all, you want to trust the data. Second of all, if there is any issue with the data, financial data is also money. You don't want to leave money on the table. The third reason is compliance. You need to do it because for compliance reasons, you need to constantly validate your data, and we can talk more about the changes in that respect. Now, I'd like to think that systems like Maxio, they do a fabulous job on accounting automation, saving a lot of manual work. But in the office of the CFO, you need to have 2 arms. You need to have the operational arm, which does things like Maxio, but you need to have the internal control arm, which checks everything. Now, if you're a public company CFO or CEO, you actually sign, by law, you need to sign on a certification every quarterly statement that you developed and maintain an internal control system, which is separate from like how you transact. Whether you transact manually or automatically, that's kind of your issue. But you developed a system that knows how to constantly check everything you kind of execute. And that's where we come into play. So I'd like to think that I've been able to see that myself when I experienced working in the office of the CFO, but it's all manual work. And guess what? A lot of things haven't changed over the years in the office of the CFO. Definitely things below the radar like internal controls. And that's where we see the opportunity.
Super interesting. I had a short stint as a public company CEO for about 2 years, and I remember signing the quarter, and you look at the CFO and you say, hey, I hope this is right. And he or she says yes, and you're like, okay. And you go through audits, but even the auditors don't have the ability at that time to dig in. It's just an enormous amount of data, especially at a public company where you have, Cambrian explosion of transactions and information that you got to process. And so this does seem like a really interesting use case for AI. And so help us understand, what is the process? We talked about in our pre-brief that there's like a 4 or 5 step process to be able to apply AI on this side of the problem, which is the internal control and compliance.
So I'd like to think that the way we kind of structure it is, first, a platform needs to get access to the data. So we can seamlessly integrate to a lot of systems, ERPs, billing, payment systems, CRM, spend management, HRIS, payroll. For each business process, you have its own systems. And then what we do is when we aggregate or collect all the data, using our proprietary technology, we arrange it in a graph database, which allows us to seamlessly link all the transactions from the various systems as if it was a single system. So we actually see the audit trail for each transaction across all the systems that process that same transaction, whether it's like a CRM the CRM or the billing or the ERP or the payment or whatever. And then our engines, our analytics engines, can actually process the data and ask the data questions. And using agentic AI, we have different agents who, again, arrange the data and then ask the data questions or run the controls in order to check the validity and the accuracy of the data. So guess what? If someone had, a bug in their API, and all of a sudden your closed-won opportunities will transact differently in the billing system because you got the wrong information in the billing system, or from the billing system it got transact differently or booked differently in the ERP, we are able to check it and validate it. Now, even if everything is smooth and great, the need to be able to develop a system or a framework that does that across all your data is part of what the certification we mentioned earlier, or it's part of the legal requirement to generate internal controls over your financial reporting. And that's basically what we're doing. So a lot of companies, they're doing it today. And even if your systems are perfect, you still need to check it. But these checks today requires a lot of manual work, which we're replacing with AI. So the ability to take data completeness, data accuracy, work is now something that we can fully automate and substantiate. Not only that, we can actually generate the work papers and the documentations that people are generating manually using Gen AI. So we are not only checking it, we can also document it. And that replaces a lot of manual work.
And I think that's really one of the key insights we'll talk a little bit about. So just to summarize, there are really 3 steps at this stage. One is to define the operations, the processes, and the policies. The second one is to automate. And to that point, the AI that you have uses machine learning to structure the data. So you're also reducing the manual work to do that. And it's really this graph database that's pulling all things. It sort of reminds me of how people describe blockchain a little bit, is you're connecting all the transactions and having visibility to them. And then the third step that you were pointing to was that AI provides answers to discrepancies and does the documentation, because that's one of the things I think about AI. People have a lot of anxiety is it's a black box. You don't know how it's making the decisions it's making, right? You just trust it. And that's always my question is, well, how do you know AI is doing the right thing? And so help us understand just that point in particular in terms of perceived risk of not understanding why the decision was made by the agent that you're trusting, you're signing off on some Terminator agent that has made all these decisions for you. If you're the public company CFO, how do you
Totally.
understand how the decisions are made?
That's a great question. So actually what we're doing is a combination of AI and rules. So the idea is that actually, let me answer you this. First of all, we are a read-only system. So we don't inject any data into your system. So a lot of the risk around AI is what happens when AI makes its own decision, but the data ends in your system. That's not what we do. We basically create insights. In order to avoid false positive, we surround the AI with rules that determines thresholds and things we may want you to look at or things which are not less important to look at. The way you should think about a system like ours is we let the machine vet likely 90% of your entire data or 95%. And the 5% we actually escalate or surface are things you look at them yourself, but we help you prioritize what to look at and what's not. And I can make a lot of analogies, including even to healthcare, how AI-supported systems help you just focus on the right thing. So remember, at the end of the day, we're trying to create internal controls across all your entire data. How do we do that? We let the machine vet 95%. We decide what's important, what's not. And whatever we escalate, whether it was the right or wrong decision, it's get to be humanely vetted. But once you vet it, instead of randomly vetting something or just take a sample, you basically let the machine vet 95% and you vet the remaining, and then you can re-educate the model whether what you vetted was right or wrong. But we just help you focus on what to look at.
That's great. I mean, one of the distinctions when I did my first tour with AI back in 2015 was the distinction we drew between artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence. And augmented intelligence is more exactly what you described, is the machines are helping you be more efficient, more effective, and more focused. It's sort of where there's judgment needed, it's teeing it up. And to your point, it also helps close the loop. So then when you make a decision, the machine, the models are learning from the decisions that you're making. So maybe it does 95%, and over 6 months, then it's able to do 96% because it's already ingested the way that you think about a certain set of problems. But I love the fact it produces work papers. The other thing you had talked about was that SafeBooks AI helps visualize how the decisions are made. And we had this example of the autonomous car and the heuristics. Can you talk a little bit about it? Because I do think that's the other thing that humans do incredibly well, not maybe there are humans who really like sitting in spreadsheets. I generally tend to do better when I'm able to visualize trends and able to see the information kind of pop rather than just looking at the numbers. But can you talk a little bit about how you're also embracing the visualization, data visualization, and perhaps that autonomous car example?
Yeah, so I actually use a lot about the autonomous car example. But before that, to answer your question, What we do is we actually take work papers companies are generating today, because in finance you always have to document your work, and then we totally automate them. So if finance are used to spending a lot of time in just creating the work paper and then investigating whatever needs to be investigated, think about the machine creating all the papers covering a certain business process and flagging the transactions or the issues you need to investigate. So eventually you're switching from more like pulling the data, organizing the data, do data crunching, all of that, and then trying to apply all kind of rules to find anomalies. That's all done by the machine. And then your time is mostly spent on investigate and remediate. That's what you're doing. I'd like to think in autonomous driving, where we are today, is where you have like the levels there in autonomous driving. Maybe we're at level 3 and the level 4 is the fully autonomous. But what you have today, I think the machine in the car helps you to correct your lane movements, make sure you stay on the right lane. Maybe it can pull the brake, if you run into someone when you pull backwards. So it's like a driving assistance system. That's what we're starting with. But the thing is, we have to understand that because in finance, I'd like to think that they're years behind in terms of like the automation opportunity, being able to save that work of pulling the data and looking at the data and focusing you where to look at. And again, automating the documentation process should probably save half of the time people spend today on compliance and data checking and all of that. We can talk a little bit about what's the advantages of saving humans time, because I think there's a lot of issues in that in the office of CFO, but yeah, go on.
Oh, no, let's go right back to it. I was just thinking of another example I heard about was producing an S1 for an IPO, and that it used to take a team of 6 or 8 people to put that together several months. And someone had written that they put an S1 together in an hour and a half. One person in an hour and a half using AI, ChatGPT to build out the S1. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can scour the web and find all the S1s that are out there. The agents can go out and find them and disseminate them and apply them to your specific situation. You can load up your information in your operating plans and management risk section and all of these things. You just engage with the dialogue. It took an hour and a half. And so I do think, to your point, and maybe this leads to the next conversation, is around you create this efficiency for the finance team now. So what do they do? What does the role become? We talk about a world perhaps of 0-day close, where you don't have accountants having to do all the accounting, and instead the machines are giving you the instant information as soon as the month is closed. So how does that change the office of the CFO?
Yeah, one of the hardest topics in AI, you probably see it also. It's like, will AI replace people or not? I'd like to think, and that's I know it's an analogy people typically smile at, but go back to the pre-calculator days. Do any of us wants to go back there and really imagine people saying, "Oh, if you'll bring the calculator, we're gonna have less jobs and all of that," right?
Yeah.
I'd like to think that a lot of the AI automation opportunities that we're facing today are actually replacing jobs people don't like to do. So what we're seeing in the office of the CFO is the following trends up until AI. It's like a lot of work is offshored, right? Go to India and low cost areas where you just give the job away, but I think you lose the scrutiny, maybe you lose some of the visibility into how it's done. The other thing is we're looking at accountant shortage. I think over the last few years, we've started to see more and more data about significant, as they call it sometimes, exodus from the profession. If you'll Google up Bloomberg and accountant shortage, you'll see a story from a year ago about 380,000 people less than a couple of years ago. The other thing is like accuracy. I think the whole, not accounting, but audit profession is based on the assertion or the assumption that basically you look at a process, you check the process, and you do a sampling. But we got to a point in world and in technology where you can check 100% of the data. So why not check 100% of the data? Why? Because I want to be able to trust my data, because financial data is money. You don't want to lose money. How many times we found for companies that they didn't bill a customer, or the contract data was changed in a way that the billing did not reflect, so they didn't collect on time. You just leave money on the table. And the other thing is compliance. You want to make sure you're as compliant as possible. So the ability to just check all your data constantly, and as Steve Sovic, our chief business officer, likes to say, AI never sleeps, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Right, never sleeps. So it works 24/7, and so I'd like to think that replacing a lot of the very tedious manual work is actually a blessing for humanity, and it's not going to take us backward but forward.
I think you're spot on, especially around the dearth of accountants in the broader market. I talk to my CPA friends. They can't find people to join the firms. They're having people. The other thing is like the average age of a CPA. They're getting closer and closer to retirement. So I do think of, to your broader point, that this function, this profession of accounting is facing an existential crisis. And that's probably why people who are by nature very conservative are probably going to embrace AI more aggressively maybe than some other functions, because they just have to. You can't get the job done without it. So I think you're absolutely spot on. We talk about data being money in that we use the term revenue leakage. And it's one of the things we point to is that if you're not billing accurately and not collecting accurately, you're losing money. So it's not just about the data. It's actually business performance and the ability to generate cash.
It's not just data, it's money.
Yeah, it's not just data, it's money. All right, well, that is going to be the takeaway for us.